All right, I'm Kaycey Hadl. I'm with the Elemental. For all of you that don't know my background, I'm a certified hypnotherapist by the IACT. I'm a psychic medium, uh, trained in Ashtanga yoga, as well as Reiki level 2 practitioner. And what we're going to talk about today is past lives. Basically, we're going to go through all the different questions that were listed online, and then I'm going to give you a little detail behind the scenes of what I've seen, what I've experienced with other people through hypnosis, as well as past life readings. So what are past lives? Well, obviously past lives are lives that we previously lived in different bodies. However, what I want to add to that is a lot of times past lives that will show up for us are past life that our ancestors have lived. So when I was experiencing some past life regression through heart hypnosis, I was experiencing past lives of my grandfather. And the only reason why I knew that is because I had a crown chakra blockage, and I was working through that blockage, and I kept having these information come forward that I didn't believe in God. I didn't know about God, that couldn't possibly believe in God, And then I started seeing flashes of my grandfather, and I realized that my grandfather's past life, his life, was stuck to me. And that's because we kind of inherit our ancestral, trauma from our parents, our grandparents, and so on and so forth. You can go back about 7 generations. So a lot of times when people are experiencing past lives, they're just actually experiencing the blueprint of their ancestors. A lot of times that gets overlaid, with our current life as whatever lessons that we're going through. So if you're having a big lesson about self-worth, you can probably look back over your last 7 generations and see your ancestral programming, how that affected your mother, your grandmother, your great grandmother, and so on, right? Because our genes get passed down to us, right? That's why we have high cheekbones or lack of one or the other. So those past lives can not always be ours. They can also be our grandparents. I also had another experience when I was in past life regression hypnosis, and I was seeing Cleopatra. And I was like, okay, there's no way I'm Cleopatra, right? But you think about how far back our lives go. Well, since the beginning of, the first man, first woman, and conceived a child, right? However that all happened, Adam and Eve, nobody exactly knows. However, that life, I wasn't Cleopatra, my grandmother was, and I was experiencing her life in that past life. So a lot of times, we're processing our grandparents' shit, our great grandparents' shit that didn't get processed in their life, and it gets passed down to us. It gets passed down as genetic traits. A lot of people are born with scoliosis. Okay, a genetic disease. Okay. And that gets passed down to us through past life trauma. There's a lot of information in regards to past life trauma in Barbara Brennan's book, Hands of Light. And she talks about certain diseases that are specifically related to past lives. And how do past lives affect our current lives? So obviously, if we have a genetic disease that is passed down to us from our grandparents, so on and so forth, from our ancient ancestors, obviously that's affecting our current life because we're more prone to certain illnesses. We're more prone to hip dysplasia, knee problems, depending on what it is. But that genetic blueprint from that past life or our ancestral lives gets passed down to us to process. A lot of people will say, well, if I have a past life reading, would that help with this knee problem or scoliosis? No, a reading will not help with that. Okay. But a past life hypnosis regression will help with that. People ask, well, why would that be? Well, a lot of times what I find is that those issues were created in past lives, and then we've got that genetic blueprint. So we have to essentially go back in time to the very first time that issue was concepted. So we can go back to our current life, that when, let's say we go back to the very first time you started to have a knee problem. Okay. Well, then we want to go back to the very first time you started to have that knee problem. And then 3, 2, 1, we bounce back to the very first time that occurred. It could be, your leg got chopped off and you only had a partial leg. It could be that you weren't born with a leg. There's a lot of things that get programmed into us from these past lives, and it cannot always be physical. It can be emotional, it can be spiritual, it can be certain blocks in different chakras. But we, as the new generation, unfortunately, we get to process that shit, our ancestral shit, as well as our past life shit, which are kind of one and the same. People always ask, well, what kind of past lives exist? There's a lot of human lives. We've all been the murderers, we've all been the saint, depending on it, if you're a new soul or if you're an old soul. I don't see many new souls. New souls are essentially people that come into this life without any karma, without any dharma, without any crap, we'll say, attached to them. Old souls, we've been around the block, a few 100,000 times. So we have more lessons here that we've processed on Earth. And with that, we're able to handle more. A lot of times, the past lives that we've had, let's say we are a slave in a past life. Okay. And then we come forward into this new life where we're a manager of all employees. And that life from when we were a slave and repressed, we learn how to manage people better to give them freedom that they deserve, like work from home or, set your own schedule. I know that's kind of a lame example, but that's kind of that balancing in regards to the past lives and what kinds we've had. A lot of people have a warrior spirit. They've led more warrior lives and they're more prone to that physical way of being. A lot of times we've been those nature spirits. I see a lot of people that are fairies or gnomes, trolls, and maybe that's because I deal more in that realm, but also different aliens, aliens from Jupiter, centaurs, minotaurs. We've all been different things, but it's those lives that will come forward in a past life regression, basically, so that we can process whatever lesson that needed to be processed that we're going through in this current life. Kind of touched on the new souls versus the old souls. What's the difference? Old souls, once again, have been around the block a time or two. They've learned their lessons. They understand the 3D dimensional life here on Earth. The old souls, they get it more. They know the difference between doing right, doing wrong, so to speak. The new souls, they come in with a clean slate, just like almost like a pure angelic being here on Earth. So we would call them earth angels. A lot of times when they come in, they come in with no know-how. And when they get thrown into the 3-dimensional world, they don't understand how to process the deep emotional content that the 3D world presents. They don't know how to handle stress. They easily get triggered by other people because they can't believe people aren't honest, aren't straightforward, aren't good. They don't understand that not all people are good people. And, as being in my 40s, we definitely have learned that. But those new souls, they come in with a clean slate, but it's learning to handle that 3D dimensionality that really can bog them down. Just a whole lot, just a different challenge for them to live in this density versus the old souls. We've been around the block a time or two and we're able to handle the density better. In regards to past life readings and past life hypnosis, a reading is just a reading. The reader is tapping into your subconscious blueprint. that is from your past lives, from your ancestral past lives. And usually those lives that come forward during a reading have to do with whatever lesson you're going through at that current point in time. With a past life regression hypnosis, you're tapping into your own subconscious. When we tap into that subconscious layer, we are able to tap into that emotional body, that physical body, that spiritual body, subconscious. When we tap into that subconscious layers, when we can get to the pattern of whatever we're going through in the past life, or going into the past life to fix, so to speak, or to heal. So basically, a past life reading doesn't do shit for you besides giving you information that you've been seeking, right? Oh, I get it. I was this Roman knight and I killed my mother in that life, and that's why I really don't like her. Okay, great. Now you'd have that information. Well, that's good knowledge, but in a past life regression, you are the one that is physically, or I should say mentally, going back into that subconscious during the first time that you murdered your mother. Okay, that's pretty deep, right? But I'm trying to get a point across here. You're trying to physically, mentally understand why you have this anger towards your mother. You don't understand, you don't know where it comes from. You get together and you clash. Okay, you want to see where that came from. Okay, so we set the tone to go back to the very first life that you and your mother had together. Essentially, we get in a super deep relaxed state so that we can access those theta brainwaves, those subconscious brainwaves, and we go back to the very first time, and you find out that you killed your mother. And why did you kill your mother in that past life? Well, you're experiencing it, right? You're experiencing you being the murderer, you handling the sword. You're experiencing your mother's emotion coming from her when you murdered her. Well, why did you murder her? Well, she stole from you, or she killed your husband, and you're experiencing this rage when you killed her. Okay, so that's really dark. But as you're going through that regression, you're re-experiencing that past life trauma. And what we want to do is, after, you can hover above your body when you're re-experiencing that trauma, or experiencing it like watching a movie. You can step back and watch the movie and let it happen. Or a lot of times I'll have you bring in a grandmother or a police officer, someone that's going to make you feel comfortable to see that scene, right? Because that stuff's really deep. And as you're re-experiencing it, you're feeling it through your body. You're feeling the rage. A lot of times you'll feel the rage. You'll feel your muscles. You'll feel yourself as a man versus a woman. You'll be able to look down at your clothes and see what you're wearing, what time period is. The time periods aren't super accurate unless you're a history buff, or if you're a person that's able to relax super well. Somnambulistic is what we would call that, easily to be hypnotized. Then you'll really get to see it like just a picture. Some people will see it. Some people will feel it, hear it, taste it, taste the, whatever it was in your mouth, taste the metallicism, or what, like let's say in that life you were chewing tobacco. You might taste the tobacco in your mouth. It's a very real experience in the regression. And so, you would re-experience that, we'll say the murder of your parent, rise above the body. And then we would ask if we could release contracts, if we could clear karma. A lot of times we'll have you bury that body in that life so you can release that life back to the past life and bring forward your current lessons from that life into your current life. It's pretty powerful. And a lot of times when people are experiencing it, the person that they're experiencing it with, let's say your mother, will feel it at the same time. They may not consciously know what is going on, but they'll call you and be like, I don't know why, but I just needed to hear your voice. And it happens all the time when people are in hypnosis. They feel that connection between you two, whatever cord that is, getting ready to separate. And so the powerfulness behind a regression versus a reading is tenfold. If you're really wanting to get through, trauma or something that you don't know where it comes from, you don't know why it's there, it's there. Let's say it's the fear of rain. You don't know why, but whenever it starts raining outside, you freak out and you go and you like hide under the bed, right? I know we're all adults, but trauma is a real thing. You want to get to the very first time when you experience that. Hey, good morning. So, we would set the intention to go back to the very first time that happened. And we would do it in a safe venue, right? Because we don't want to re-experience trauma, feel it again if it's not safe. That's why we always bring in these helpers. But once we re-experience it, it taps in to the mental, physical, and emotional bodies. And then if we're able to get to the very first time, essentially we can rewrite that story of that trauma and release it. So let's say every time it's a rainstorm and you're experiencing the rain, you're freaking out. That trigger after you do the regression for that next 3 weeks, that trigger will process. Okay. You hear the rain, you freak out. It will slowly diminish where the rain no longer triggers you, right? Because we released that access point to that trigger. We released that emotional body and we were able to negate it. So that way you're not carrying it forward into your current life. A lot of the things that people experience in a past life have to do with what they're going through in our current life. It's a powerful tool to have in, your belt of tools. Readings, it's a wonderful way to learn information, but it is not a healing method. Okay. Feel like I beat a dead horse there. So when we experience the past life trauma, and we kind of touched on that, you might experience like deep weeping because it was so intense. You might actually feel it in the body. A lot of times people, if let's say they were stabbed in the eye in a past life, okay, and they went back to that past life, they'll re-experience that wound in the face and they'll feel it. And a lot of times they'll feel it go through the face and come out the other side. And it could show up in your current life as like a little mark on your face, or maybe you have issues with a certain eye and you don't understand why. Doctors don't have any reason. They can't explain it to you. Well, a lot of times it ties into our past life wounds or our ancestral wounds. Oh, excuse me, I had a belch there. So obviously releasing some of that shit for everybody today. Past life connections, how do we know and why? That feeling we get when we meet somebody, like we've known them for ages. Well, it's usually because we have known them for ages. It could be a feeling, it could be a knowing, it could be a seeing. I've done a lot of, one time I was driving through Dodge City. And I think I've driven through Dodge before. I can't remember. It's been a while. Driving through, and all of a sudden I had a moment in time, like a flashback, and I started seeing all these past lives when I was driving through Dodge City, Kansas. I'm like, oh my God, I'm driving. I shouldn't be having this happen, right? But it's just that it can be that flash. So just like with people, when you meet somebody, boom, 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 you see like 3 lives all in a matter of 2 seconds. And you're like, oh, that's why this is. Or you'll feel it. That's just that knowing. It's like, kind of like your cells just know when you're eating something good for yourself. They just know. They start vibrating fast and getting excited. It's just that knowing in your cells that you've met this person before. Now, I will tell you, past life connections can be really strong and not all of them are good. They obviously have a reason for them happening. And I want to give you a little example of not so good. I had met this person when I was working as a business development manager here in Kansas City. Super intelligent man, very attractive. He said the first time he saw me, he didn't even see me. He just felt my energy walk across the front of the building. I was outside walking around looking at landscape stuff. And I was like, okay, well, that's strange, buddy. Thanks a lot. But I felt the connection that he had with me, and he specifically arranged a meeting just so he could meet me. I felt the connection. I don't know where it was from. I didn't know why, but we became friends, and we talked and talked and talked and talked. And we just had so much in common, and we just had this incredible connection. And it got to the point where, I would know when he was having breakfast. I would know when he's taking a poop. I would know when he was putting on his shoes. It was so frustrating because, he was one of those unattainable people. I couldn't have this person in my life, and they were constantly gaslighting me. They say, yeah, I'll meet you here. And then they wouldn't show up. And it was kind of toxic. And I couldn't get off their wavelength. And it was just such a strong, strong connection. And I knew we had had past lives together, but I wasn't fully aware of what they were. So I set down some intention on a certain full moon to do a little ritual and to tap into all the past lives that him and I had together so that I could release that past life connection and those cords. And that's essentially what I did. And after I did that, I was kind of like watching a movie theater for me because I'm clairvoyant. But I had seen about 60 lives that this guy and I had together. And it always was when I was rescuing him or he was rescuing me. He was the father, I was the daughter. He was the husband, I was the wife. It was always like that. Once I released that cord, I didn't have to know when he was taking a poop anymore. That's a real thing. It's rough. Sometimes those past life connections are rough, especially when it's a toxic person. Just because we knew them in a past life doesn't mean in this life that they're exactly good. Also, want to point out one thing. If you decide that you want to release a cord, or say, to a past life from someone that you know in your current life, when you release that cord, you release that connection. So making sure you really want to release that connection, because once you do, there's no going back. I wanted to release the connection because I didn't need to or want to feel everything that this person was going through, especially since they were unattainable. They wanted to be in my life, but they couldn't be in my life. So just remembering that point is making sure that you want to release that person from your life, because once you clear it, it's cleared. It's not coming back. Kind of going through my questions here. Obviously, we do meet people in our current life from our past life for certain reasons. What those reasons are, you can tap into that through past life regression, yes, and figure it out why. I always tell people, it's not always the reason that we think it is. A lot of times, what will happen is, you have this person that came forward in your life, and you feel the connection there. And let's say that you meet this person, and for no reason, they just love you, and they give you $1 million, and you're like, holy shit, what would have happened if I didn't meet that person? Well, you decide you want to know what happened in a past life and what the connection is with this person. Well, let's say we go back in that past life. In a past life, they stole all your money, they robbed you blind, and they killed your wife. It's kind of like that karma balancing. That seems kind of far-fetched, but I will tell you, a lot of times that's what it is. It's a big karma balance act. Phobias and past life trauma. All right. Kind of touched on that a little bit with the rainstorm. When we have a phobia, there's usually a trauma that has occurred to create that phobia. It could be a trauma to you, or it could be a trauma to one of your ancestors. I'm going to give you a little example to kind of guide you on that idea. For me, I was always deathly afraid of snakes. Okay, I love every creature under the sun. There isn't a bee, butterfly, bug, anything, name it. I always love everything. But in the past, I would say in my 20s, I was deathly afraid of snakes. And I remember, I would see a snake and I'd freak out. It's kind of, that Kansas thing, I feel like, that we get taught snakes are bad, run away, depending on who your parents are. A lot of my folks, they lived in the country. You see a snake, you chop its head off. This one time I was at a party and this person came up behind me with this huge boa constrictor. I don't know, it was like 10 feet long. I mean, the thing was massive, like, it's about that big in girth. And I'm sitting on some steps and they put it on my shoulders, right? And I freaked out because I hate snakes at that time. So I knew that at the time when they just flip and drop this big snake on my back, that if I didn't calm down, that I was probably going to get, strangled, eaten, I don't know. So I had to like calm myself down. Like, I'm calm. And once I was able to calm myself down, it was really cool because it was like the snake, as it was crawling across my shoulders, was giving me a massage. It's like, wow, I really did need that because that's where I hold all my tension. So, this one time I was working in past life regression. When you go through hypnosis training, you get hypnotized like 1,000 times. So you kind of have to work through your shit no matter who you are, if you're going to go through the training. And I was in this past life regression and I was this Indian woman and I was a snake charmer and I worked for an emperor at that time and I was entertainment. I'd go in and I'd charm the snakes and the snakes just loved me and I'd carry the snakes all around with me. And I would go in and do entertainment, essentially pulling the cobras out of the barrels and showing them to everyone. And people were fascinated. The emperor was fascinated by my talent. So they decided that they would take the snakes and take me and throw me down a big well. They threw me down this huge well that was full of snakes and all the snakes loved me, right? But they decided not to feed the snakes and they left me down there. And we all know what happens when you don't feed animals, right? So all my pets that I loved with all my heart ate me and thus creating the fear of snakes. I actually really love snakes now. There's not a snake that I'm not afraid of, or I fucked that all up. There's not a snake I'm afraid of. I like all creatures. I talk to just about any animal that I will find outside. And it's a good thing because now I live in the woods and there's snakes everywhere. But a lot of times, once again, there's that past life trauma, that phobia that has happened in a past life. And we go back to that past life, the very first time that phobia happened, we're able to clear it. I really do love snakes. They're adorable. I think every creature has its place in this life. So, physical healing in past life. We kind of touched on that in regards to the physical healing. Some physicality items cannot be healed through going to past life. I always tell people, if you're not coming in specifically for past life regression, if you're coming in for a trauma or anything along those lines, essentially we want to get to the trauma in your current life, and then we go back to that past life because we want to know the very first time it happened in this life. And a lot of times it has to do with inner child work. Something you happened when you were a kid. It could be something really small, but you have to remember that your mind is created by your own perception. So let's go back to that knee pain, let's change that a little bit. Let's go back to that fear of snakes. If our mind creates our perception, those perceptions that were developed over many, many lifetimes are carried forward to you in your current lifetime. That perception can get altered, especially so when you're in theta or delta brainwaves. Now, between the ages of 0 and 3, we're in delta brainwaves. That's when we're the most highly suggestible. And I always tell people, be very mindful of what you're saying to your kid. Make sure it's serious and not joking. Because a lot of times when we're between the ages of 0 and 3, that suggestibility, it goes right into our subconscious. And then, so an example would be if you're a parent and you're laughing and your child is pretending like poking you and you're like, you're killing me, you're killing my gut. And then as you age and you grow up, you always have this pain in your gut. You can't understand why. And then you end up getting gut cancer. Okay. This is kind of just a basic thing. But that pain, your pain in my gut gets programmed in that body in this lifetime between the ages of 0 and 3, because you're in that highly suggestible age. That's when usually the most programming is done, right? And it's funny because people always don't implore how important the ages of 0 and 3 is. Like, oh, the kid will just forget, it's not a big deal. Well, those are when those subconscious patterns really get programmed into you, okay? Now, as we age between the ages of 3 and I believe it's 13, we switch to more of those theta brainwaves, which aren't as highly suggestible, that they're still suggestible. So, just being mindful of that talk with your kids, because they get those items programmed into them. But in regards to the physical healing, a lot of times we hold emotional pain in our body as physical pain. So, for example, and we'll just use my awesome family as an example. People that have issues with inflexibility, moving forward, helping themselves move forward. Oftentimes they'll have knee issues or hip issues. Those can definitely be passed down from family to family to family to family, right? It's just a genetic trait. I've been told by my mom a million times, just wait till you get older, you're going to have this issue, right? I'm like, okay, thanks, Mom. You're not helping me here. But that inflexibility, it can go back for many, many past lives. So let's say in a past life that you were a ruler and your rule was what it was. You didn't let anybody interject. You were a tyrant and you were inflexible in your ways, and you constantly had those knee problems, right? And that inflexibility, that emotional pain of being inflexible, not listening to other people's information, it all gets jammed down into your knee. And it never gets processed. You never change. You still have that same inflexibility. Everything has to be exactly how you have it, because you can't fucking change who you are or your strict ways of thinking. Okay. You're inflexible. And that issue gets passed down and passed down, passed down. That emotional pain gets stored in your knee. We can go into that physical pain the very first time that physical pain in your knee started occurring. And of course, we want to get to in your current life. Some people will jump to a past life just because they're just hypermobile. They can do that. But if we get to the very first time, then you can feel it. And a lot of times that we'll say, as you're going through it, you're in the regression, you're feeling that pain in your knee. And, it could be greater. We want to magnetize it, right? We want to blow it up. So that way we can learn that we can control that pain. We can turn it up, turn it down. But if we can get to that emotional body, the very first time that emotional issue was created, then we can release it. And then after the regression, for those 3 weeks, you process that out. You go through a kind of like a realignment. So something that's been stiff, something that's been holding a block, keeping you from moving forward. It's there. You don't know why the fuck it's there, but it's there. It gets released. And then suddenly all the red blood cells and the white blood cells are rushing to that area to heal it. The pain might get a little greater, it might change, but then it gets released through the body. When I have processed items in regards to fear. Okay. A lot of times we'll store fear in our liver and in our kidneys. you will release that in your liver and in your kidneys, which is really fun. And I mean that in a joking way. But for me, I had processed a super huge, like three different lives that had regards to fear. And I processed it out in my kidneys. And I had some super bad kidney stones to the point I could not eat anything that was high in fat because seriously, it would lay me out. Okay. Like I couldn't get up. I couldn't do anything. And in those 3 weeks, after I processed it out, that same block that was keeping me from moving forward in the direction I wanted to was released. I didn't get triggered anymore. But we release those blocks on all levels, right? We want to release it on the emotional body, the physical body, the mental body, and the spiritual body. It's a powerful tool for sure, past life regression, as well as just regular hypnosis for tapping into physical trauma, mental trauma, emotional trauma. So anyways, do you guys have any questions in regards to